Now, there is a problem, as I've said, which is that most people simply don't listen. You are, as I've said, really a special case because you listen hard. You have to. Most people simply don't listen to the world at all. Why is this? Well, first of all, we invented ways of recording what goes on. A long time ago, if you didn't listen and you missed it, you missed it. Well, now we can write it down, we can record it. I've written a book, so if you want to go to sleep right now, fine, you can go and buy my book. It's got the same stuff in it. So that kind of recording and encapsulating of information means that the premium on listening has reduced. But there are other reasons as well. We've become impatient as a society. We don't want oratory, we want sound bites. We don't listen to albums anymore, we listen to tracks. And in fact, my children, not even whole tracks, generally. People don't watch television, they channel hop. Our communication gets briefer and briefer. There is an argument that the internet is not connecting us, but in some ways disconnecting us. So this text message is all too common in the UK. And I'm not sure that's a very connected way for human beings to communicate with each other. And then, as well as our impatience and that speed that we're getting into, we also have a desensitization going on. Our media have to shout and scream at us to get our attention. And with all of this high emotion, this intensity, it means that the quiet and the subtle starts to get missed. There's a societal, a cultural issue here, which I think is well portrayed. If I remind you of the Chinese duality of yin and yang, where yin is dark, yielding, feminine, moon, cold, those kind of concepts, whereas the yang is heat, male, outgoing, sun, and so forth. Well, if I replace those two with sound words, I think you might agree with me that our culture has become far more interested in telling than in listening. We've become very pushy. And the result of that is that we have a world that looks like this and sounds like this. Incessant voices speaking to us the whole time from all sorts of different sources. Which brings me on to the subject of noise. Noise is becoming a very, very, very serious problem indeed. I'm going to give you some numbers and see if you can guess what these are. 1 in 4 Europeans is having their quality of life seriously reduced by noise. This is from the European Union. 4 million. That's the number of people in Europe who are having their sleep seriously disturbed by noise at night. 4 million people. Just imagine the cost of that to them, to their families, to the people they work with. It's 2% of Europe's population. 1 million years. This number just came out last week from the World Health Organization, and they've released a major study of noise in Europe. And they estimate that at a minimum, Europeans are losing 1 million healthy years every year to noise. It's become the second most significant health problem in Europe. And here's another one, tens of billions. Well, that's what the European Union estimates the cost of noise is to Europe in terms of reduced property prices, but also in terms of the cost of healthcare for people who are depressed, stressed, or suffering from ischemic heart disease, stroke, gastric problems, sexual dysfunction, all sorts of emotional and mental problems as a result of noise. It's a serious problem. The culprits are well known, transport, construction industry, and then all of us. The issue is that those sources are multiplied by an environment which is badly designed. Now, this is where we need to start engaging town planners and architects in the conversation. And I'm really excited that the HRF is starting to think in that way about aggressively taking on the mission of improving our sound environment. Because if we change the environment, instead of that multiplier, what we have is a dividing sign. We have noise going in and being reduced by an environment instead of noise going in and being amplified by an environment. Acoustics, very, very important. I'll give you a couple of examples of this. Education. So you may have a noise source like this. This is a very young noise source, but nevertheless, not atypical for a school situation. Put that into an old-fashioned school building with lousy acoustics, lots of reverberation, not much absorbency, and you have massive health problems for teachers. There's a recent piece of work by Gerhard Sissler which has shown that teachers have got their life expectancy reduced by 3 years. 3 years of life they lose as a result of the chronic stress of that kind of noise day after day after day. They develop vocal nodes because they have to shout so hard to get over the top of the noise. And they're not the only people losing, because for those children, if you have a classroom where the children at the back are experiencing speech intelligibility of, say, 0.5, which is not uncommon, that means they're only getting 5 words in 10, the teacher says. That means they don't even receive half their education. What chance have they got? Education? Serious. Healthcare. How does anybody get well in a soundscape like this? I spent quite a lot of time in an intensive care unit when my father was dying a few years ago now, and it was just miserable to be in rooms where that was the soundscape. It's been proven over and over again now that sound can speed up recovery, can actually enhance people's recovery and get them well from things they weren't getting well from before. Certainly it can reduce hospital stays, speed people through, and it reduces the stress for the people working in the hospital. The noise level in hospitals, according to American research, is double what it was in the 1970s. Serious. With all that going on, it's no surprise we take defensive measures. When you were little, if you didn't want to hear something, you could stick your fingers in your ears and hum. Well, these days people do that, but it looks a bit cooler. So this is the defense mechanism that most people have adopted to get away from the noise that's trying to intrude on them. The trouble is there are some really big effects of that as well. And the biggest one is this. Noise-induced hearing loss. 1 in 6 American teenagers has got damaged hearing as a result of headphone abuse. 1 in 6. We may be raising an entire generation of deaf children because the health risks of constant exposure to 90 or 100 decibels delivered deep inside the ear are really not known by children. I saw one tragic newspaper article where a girl was quoted as saying, "I'm sure my ears will adapt to it, though." Well, you know that's not true. It's tragic. Anytime I go on a tube and I can hear that leakage coming out of somebody's ears, I know they're damaging their hearing. It's a very major problem. Not the only problem with headphone abuse. This phenomenon is an interesting one. The word was coined by Murray Schafer. Schizophrenia is a disconnect between what I see and what I hear. So there's a dislocation. It removes me from the real world if I'm walking around with something different in my ears, which has got nothing to do with what I'm looking at. And there's another effect of that as well. We take a big public space, like a train station or a hall or a room like this, and very often we are turning it now into this. Millions of little personal sound bubbles. And in that situation, nobody's listening to anybody. There's no listening going on apart from my own little personal sound bubble. And that may be a contributor to a modern phenomenon which I've just blogged about with great relish. This word has come out in the last year or two in the UK, sodcasting. I don't know if you've come across the word. It's typically applied to the group of teenagers at the back of a bus playing music on a mobile phone. through a lousy loudspeaker and upsetting everybody around them by polluting the environment with their sound. So it really means the unkind creation of noise, upsetting people, clearly upsetting people and not being thoughtful. They're not the only people doing sodcasting. I was in an airport lounge last week, and I was subjected to some white-collar sodcasting. There were about 30 people in this airport lounge quietly working away. It was a very serene environment. And there was one man on the phone who obviously thought he had to speak loud enough to be heard in the UK from Germany without the aid of the device. Yeah, well, what they've got to do is this. And we're all sitting trying to work with this one person polluting the entire room. That's sodcasting. And so is mechanical sodcasting, leaf blowers, devices like that. There's a piece of work I quote in my book which estimates that one noisy scooter driving through the streets of Paris at 2 a.m. will wake up 250,000 people. That's powerful sodcasting. And then there's institutional sodcasting. In London, they play classical music in the tube stations now because they found it reduces vandalism. So we're all having it imposed on us. Commercial sodcasting, music in shops, and it goes on and on. The thoughtless imposition of sound on other people. Just a word on music while I'm on the subject, actually. Music is very powerful, and I spend a lot of my time talking to organizations and trying to persuade them not to play music in public places. Music is something we recognize fast and we associate with things very quickly. I'll just give you one example. Many of you will recognize that. If I talk to young audiences these days, I get a blank look for that chord. But many of you will have recognized the first chord of Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. Or you certainly will associate this with something. Now that's 1 second of music. It's very powerful. And the thing about music is that it has a specific intent. I don't know much music that was made, carefully made in a recording studio by people who made it in order not to be listened to. So there's a clash. If we play music as oral wallpaper, it's not fit for purpose. The music is shouting, "Listen to me," and we're pretending it's background. That's a mismatch. That's why music is incorrect.